The first time I saw Ethan Caldwell, he was a storm in a tailored suit, striding through a Manhattan courtroom like he owned the air itself. I was just a barista, 23, scraping by in a city that chewed up dreamers like me. But when his piercing blue eyes met mine across a crowded cafe later that day, I felt the world tilt. Suddenly, I was no longer invisible. It was 2023, and New York pulsed with a restless energy that matched my own. I'd come here from a small town in Ohio, chasing a vague dream of writing, but mostly serving overpriced lattes to people who never looked twice. Ethan, though, looked. That first day, he ordered a black coffee, no sugar, and left a tip that covered my rent. "Keep the change," he said, his voice low and deliberate, like he was testing me. I didn't know then that he was Ethan Caldwell, the lawyer who just won a high-profile case for a celebrity client. His face splashed across every newsstand in the city. All I knew was the way his fingers brushed mine when I handed him his cup, and how my heart forgot how to beat. We didn't speak again for weeks, but he kept coming back to the cafe. Always the same order, always those eyes that seemed to see right through me. "My name's Lucas Harper, by the way. Nobody special, just a guy with a notebook full of half-finished stories and a knack for noticing things others miss." Like the way Ethan's jaw tightened when his phone buzzed, or how he'd linger at the counter, asking me about my day like he actually cared. It was subtle at first, a slow burn of glances and small talk, until one rainy evening he stayed past closing. "You ever feel like you're hiding from the world?" he asked, leaning against the counter as I mopped the floor. I laughed, nervous, and said all the time. That was the night he asked me to dinner. Dinner turned into late-night walks through Central Park, stolen moments in dimly lit bars where no one knew his name. Ethan was 32, a rising star in the legal world, but with me, he was just Ethan, funny, intense, vulnerable in ways I didn't expect. He told me about growing up in Connecticut, the pressure of a wealthy family, the law degree he pursued to escape their expectations. He never mentioned his personal life, though, and I didn't ask. I was too caught up in the thrill of being wanted by someone like him, someone who could have anyone but chose me. Our relationship was a secret from the start, not because he was ashamed, he said, but because his world was a minefield. The press, my clients, my firm, they'd eat us alive, he explained one night, his hands cupping my face in his sleek apartment overlooking the Hudson. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. So we built our own world in the shadows. Nights in his penthouse, weekend getaways to quiet cabins upstate, moments where I could pretend we were just two people in love. He'd read my stories, tell me I was talented, promise we'd find a way to be open someday. I clung to that promise like a lifeline. But secrets have a way of unraveling. 6 months in, I started noticing cracks. Ethan's phone would light up with calls he'd ignore, his mood shifting without explanation. He'd cancel plans last minute, citing work, but I'd see his name in the tabloids, linked to gala events or high society dinners. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. Then one night, as we lay tangled in his sheets, he whispered, "You're the only thing keeping me sane, Lucas." The words were sweet, but they carried a weight I didn't understand. Not yet. It was a crisp October evening when everything changed. We were at a tiny jazz club in the village, tucked in a corner booth, his hand resting on my knee under the table. The music was soft, the lights low, and for a moment, I thought we could stay like that forever. Then the door opened, and a man walked in, tall, blonde, with a presence that turned heads. Ethan froze, his hands slipping from mine. "Lucas," he said, his voice tight, "we need to go." I didn't understand why until we were outside, the cold air biting my skin. "Who was that?" I asked, my stomach twisting. Ethan didn't look at me. "Nobody," he said, but his eyes betrayed him. I pushed, harder than I ever had. "Tell me, Ethan, who was that?" He stopped walking, his breath visible in the chilly air. "That," he said finally, "was Julian." Julian. The name hit like a punch. Ethan's ex, the one he'd never mentioned, but whose shadow I'd felt in every hesitation, every unanswered call. Julian, the son of a senator, The man Ethan had been with for years before me. Julian, who'd left him for reasons Ethan never shared, but who was back now, standing in our world like he belonged there. We didn't talk much on the way back to his place. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the look on Ethan's face, guarded, haunted, kept me silent. When we reached his apartment, he poured himself a whiskey and stared out at the city skyline. "He's not supposed to be here," he said, more to himself than to me. He left. He was gone. I stood there, feeling like an intruder in the life we'd built. "What does he want?" I asked. Ethan turned, his eyes meeting mine for the first time that night. "Everything," he said. "He wants everything." That was the moment I knew our secret wasn't just about protecting us from the world. It was about protecting Ethan from his past, a past that had just walked back into our lives, ready to tear it all apart. The days after Julian's reappearance were like walking on glass. Ethan tried to act normal, but I could feel the distance growing, a chasm I didn't know how to cross. He'd kiss me goodbye in the mornings, his lips lingering a second too long, like he was memorizing me. I wanted to believe it was love, but fear gnawed at me. Fear that I was losing him to a ghost I couldn't fight. I threw myself into work at the cafe, hoping routine would dull the ache. But every time the door chimed, I'd look up, half expecting Julian to walk in, his polished confidence shattering the fragile bubble Ethan and I had built. I didn't know much about Julian, only what I'd pieced together from Ethan's silences and the occasional tabloid snippet I couldn't resist reading. Julian Hayes, 34, political heir, known for his charm and ruthless ambition. He and Ethan had been a power couple once, their names whispered in elite circles before Julian left for D.C., chasing a career in politics. Why he was back, I didn't know, but his presence felt like a storm cloud over my life. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I showed up at Ethan's office, a sleek glass tower in Midtown, determined to get answers. The receptionist, a woman with a smile too perfect to be genuine, told me he was in a meeting. I waited in the lobby, clutching my notebook like a shield, watching men and women in expensive suits move with purpose. When Ethan finally appeared, he looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his hair slightly mussed. "Lucas," he said, surprised but not entirely pleased. "What are you doing here?" "I need to know what's going on," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You've been different since he showed up." "Julian, what does he want?" Ethan glanced around, his eyes darting to the glass walls, the security cameras. "Not here," he whispered, pulling me toward a quiet corner. "It's complicated, okay? Julian, he's working on something big, a campaign. He needs my help. Your help." I repeated, my stomach sinking. "What does that have to do with us?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing, but now felt like a wall. "He's not just here for work, Lucas. He wants to reconnect. He thinks we can pick up where we left off." The words hit like a slap. I stared at him, searching for the man who'd promised me forever in stolen moments. "And what do you want?" I asked, my voice breaking. Ethan's eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw the man I loved. "You," he said, stepping closer. "I want you." But Julian, he knows things. About me, about my career. He could make things difficult. I didn't know what that meant, but the fear in his voice was real. I wanted to push, to demand every detail, but something in his expression stopped me. Instead, I nodded, letting him pull me into a quick, desperate hug. "We'll figure it out," he murmured. "I promise." But as I left the building, the city lights blurring through unshed tears, I wasn't so sure. The next week was a blur of half-truths and stolen moments. Ethan was busier than ever, his phone constantly buzzing with calls he'd take in another room. I tried to focus on my writing, pouring my confusion into stories I'd never show anyone. But the more I wrote, the more I realized how little I knew about Ethan's world. The deals, the secrets, the stakes. I was an outsider, a secret lover in a life built on appearances. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, and Ethan had invited me to a charity gala, a rare chance to see his world up close. "Just as my guest," he'd said, his tone careful. "We'll keep it low-key." I agreed, even though it stung to be hidden in plain sight. The gala was at a glittering hotel ballroom, filled with people who moved like they owned the world. I felt out of place in my rented suit, clutching a glass of champagne I didn't drink. Ethan was across the room, shaking hands, his smile polished but distant. I was watching him when I felt a presence beside me. Lucas, right? The voice was smooth, confident. I turned to find Julian, his blonde hair catching the chandelier light, his suit tailored to perfection. Up close, he was even more intimidating, his green eyes sharp and assessing. "I've heard about you," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Ethan's little secret." I bristled, but before I could respond, he leaned closer, his voice low. "You're in over your head, kid. Ethan's not who you think he is. Did he tell you about the deal we made years ago? The one that got him his fancy office?" My heart pounded, but I kept my face neutral. "What do you want, Julian?" I asked. He laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "I want what's mine," he said. "And trust me, Lucas, I always get what I want." He walked away, leaving me shaken, my mind racing with questions. What deal? What had Ethan hidden from me? And why did Julian's words feel like a warning I couldn't ignore? I found Ethan later, his face pale when I told him about Julian's words. "He's bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "He's just trying to get in your head." But as we left the gala, his hand in mine felt less like a promise and more like a plea. I didn't know what Julian was planning, but I knew one thing. He wasn't here to lose. The air between Ethan and me grew heavier with every passing day. His promises felt like fragile threads, fraying under the weight of Julian's return. I wanted to trust him, to believe we could weather this, but doubt crept in like a thief, stealing the warmth from our quiet moments. I started noticing things I hadn't before, how Ethan's eyes darted to his phone, how he changed the subject when I asked about his past with Julian. I was falling in love with a man whose life was a locked door, and I didn't have a key. One cold November morning, I decided to confront the unknown. I wasn't proud of it, but desperation makes you do things you never thought you would. Ethan was in court all day, so I let myself into his apartment with the spare key he'd given me. I told myself I just wanted to feel close to him, to find something, anything, that would prove our love was real. But deep down, I was looking for answers. His penthouse was immaculate, all glass and steel, a world away from my cramped studio. I wandered through the rooms, my heart pounding, until I found his home office. The desk was cluttered with legal files, but tucked in a drawer, I found a small lockbox. My hand shook as I pried it open with a paperclip, guilt warring with curiosity. Inside was a stack of letters, yellowed with age, and a single photo. Ethan and Julian, younger, laughing on a beach somewhere, their arms around each other. The love in Ethan's eyes was unmistakable, and it cut me deeper than I expected. The letters were worse. They were from Julian, written years ago, full of passion and promises. One, dated just before their breakup, mentioned a deal that would set them up for life. It was vague, but the tone was clear. Julian had held power over Ethan, and maybe he still did. I was still processing when I heard the front door open. "Lucas!" Ethan's voice called, sharp with surprise. I shoved the letters back, my heart racing, but it was too late. He stood in the doorway, his face a mix of shock and betrayal. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice low but dangerous. I stammered, tried to explain, but the words sounded hollow. I needed to understand, Ethan. Julian said things at the gala about a deal about you." His expression darkened, and for the first time, I saw anger in his eyes. "You went through my things?" he said, stepping closer. "You don't trust me?" "I want to," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "But you're shutting me out. What's the deal he keeps talking about? Why is he back?" Ethan's shoulders slumped, and he sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. "It's not what you think," he said finally. "Julian and we worked together on a case early in my career. It was high stakes, a corporate fraud thing. We bent some rules, got evidence in ways we shouldn't have. It won the case, made my name, but Julian kept proof of what we did. He's holding it over me now. I stared at him, the pieces clicking into place. He's blackmailing you? Ethan nodded, his face pale. He wants me to help with his campaign, to use my connections. If I don't, he'll leak what we did. It'll ruin me, Lucas, my career, my reputation, everything. I wanted to be angry, to scream at him for keeping this from me, but all I felt was fear for him, for us. Why didn't you tell me? I asked softly. Because I wanted to protect you, he said, his voice breaking. You're the one good thing in my life, Lucas. I didn't want you tangled up in this mess. He reached for my hand, and I let him take it, even though part of me wanted to pull away. What do we do now? I asked. He looked at me, his eyes full of a desperation I'd never seen before. We fight, he said. Together. But fighting wasn't easy. Julian was relentless, showing up at events Ethan attended, dropping cryptic comments to reporters that hinted at scandal without saying enough to be sued. I watched Ethan unravel, his confidence replaced by a quiet panic. I tried to be his anchor, but I was drowning too. My writing suffered. My shifts at the cafe felt endless, and every time I saw Ethan, I wondered if he was still mine. Then came the night Julian crossed a line. I was closing up the cafe when he walked in, alone, his smile as sharp as a blade. You're still here, he said, leaning against the counter. I thought you'd have run by now. I clenched my jaw, refusing to take the bait. What do you want, Julian? He smirked, sliding a manila envelope toward me. A gift, he said. Open it when you're ready to see the truth about your boyfriend. I didn't open it that night. I couldn't. Instead, I took it home, the weight of it burning in my hands. When I finally told Ethan, his face went white. Don't open it, he said, his voice urgent. Promise me, Lucas. But the envelope sat on my desk, a ticking bomb, and I knew I couldn't ignore it forever. Julian was playing a game, and we were losing. The envelope haunted me for days, its presence a constant reminder of the secrets Ethan kept. I wanted to trust him, to believe we could face Julian together, but the weight of the unknown was crushing. Every time I looked at Ethan, I saw the man in that beach photo, young, carefree, in love with someone who wasn't me. I hated myself for doubting him, but Julian's words echoed in my head. Ethan's not who you think he is. I opened the envelope on a sleepless night, alone in my apartment. Inside were documents, legal filings, emails, handwritten notes. They painted a picture of the case Ethan had mentioned, but it was worse than he'd let on. He and Julian hadn't just bent rules. They'd fabricated evidence, paid off a witness. The case had launched Ethan's career, but the proof in my hands could end it. There was also a letter from Julian addressed to me. He'll never choose you over his ambition, it read. Walk away, Lucas, before he breaks you too. I felt sick, betrayed by the man I loved and the lies he'd told. When I confronted Ethan the next day, he didn't deny it. I was young, Lucas, he said, his voice raw. Julian pushed me into it. I didn't know how to say no. He reached for me, but I stepped back, the envelope between us like a wall. You lied to me, I said. You let me think this was just about blackmail, but it's bigger than that. You built your life on this. Ethan's eyes filled with tears, a sight so rare it shook me. I'm not that person anymore, he said. I've been trying to make it right, to be better for you. I wanted to believe him, but the trust we'd built was crumbling. I need time, I said, and left him standing there, his world falling apart as much as mine. The next few weeks were agony. I avoided Ethan, ignored his calls, threw myself into writing to escape the pain. But the city felt smaller, like Julian's shadow was everywhere. I saw him once, outside the cafe, watching me with that same predatory smile. I knew he was waiting for me to break, to leave Ethan, so he could reclaim what he thought was his. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. One night, Ethan showed up at my apartment, soaked from the rain, his eyes wild with determination. I'm done hiding, he said before I could speak. I told my firm about Julian, about the case. I'm coming clean, Lucas. I don't care what it costs me. I stared at him, stunned. You could lose everything, I said. He nodded, stepping closer. I already did, when I lost you. He told me he'd hired a new lawyer, someone to handle the fallout. He was ready to face the consequences, to rebuild his life honestly with me. It was the Ethan I'd fallen for, brave, flawed, fighting for us. I let him in, and we talked until dawn, laying bare every secret, every fear. For the first time, I felt like we were equals, not a secret and a star. But Julian wasn't done. A week later, a news article dropped, anonymous but clearly his work. It didn't name Ethan outright, but hinted at a prominent lawyer with a shady past. The press swarmed, and Ethan's firm put him on leave. We braced for the worst, but I refused to let him face it alone. We started planning how to control the narrative, how to protect his career without compromising the truth. It was a long shot, but it felt like our fight now, not just his. Then Julian made his boldest move. He invited Ethan to a public debate, framed as a discussion on legal ethics, but clearly a trap to expose him. Ethan wanted to decline, but I saw an opportunity. Face him, I said. Show the world who you are. He looked at me, doubt and hope warring in his eyes. You really believe in me? He asked. I took his hand, my heart steady for the first time in weeks. I do. The night of the debate, I sat in the audience, my stomach in knots. Julian was all charm, his words sharp and calculated, but Ethan was different, raw, honest, unafraid. When Julian tried to bait him with veiled accusations, Ethan didn't flinch. I've made mistakes, he said, his voice clear, but I'm not hiding anymore. I'm here to own them. The room went silent, then erupted in murmurs. I saw the shock on Julian's face, the realization that his plan was backfiring. Ethan wasn't just fighting for his career, he was fighting for us. The debate changed everything. Ethan's honesty disarmed Julian, turning the spotlight back on him. Reporters dug into Julian's past, uncovering his own questionable deals, and suddenly, he was the one scrambling to save face. Ethan's firm reinstated him, though the road to rebuilding his reputation was long. But more than that, the debate freed us. Ethan came out publicly, not just about his past, but about us. He introduced me at a press conference, his hand in mine, and for the first time, I wasn't a secret. The world saw us, and while some judged, others cheered. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We moved forward together, no longer hiding. Ethan took on pro bono cases, using his skills to help those who couldn't afford it, a way to atone for his past. I kept writing, my stories now infused with the courage I'd found in loving him. Julian faded from our lives, his threats empty without Ethan's fear to fuel them. We didn't hear from him again, but I knew he'd never forget the moment he lost. One spring evening, a year after it all began, we returned to that jazz club in the village. The same booth, the same soft music, but we were different, stronger, open, unafraid. Ethan took my hand under the table, his thumb tracing circles on my skin. I almost lost you, he said, his voice low. I smiled, leaning closer. But you didn't. Our love wasn't a secret anymore, but it was still ours, built on trust forged through fire. We'd faced a past that tried to tear us apart and came out whole. Not perfect, but whole. As we walked home through the city, the lights reflecting off the pavement, I realized something. Love doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It just needs to be true. Looking back, I see the beauty in our struggle. It taught me that love isn't just about the moments that take your breath away. It's about the ones that make you fight to keep breathing. Ethan and I weren't just lovers. We were survivors. Two people who chose each other over fear, over secrets, over a world that tried to define us. And in that choice, we found something unbreakable.